ChadGallivanter here, and I make videos about travel, history, and Florida life here on YouTube. Today we are in Ocala, Florida, at a very special historic landmark. What you're looking at is a replica of a fort that stood on this very site during U.S. tensions with the Seminole. This historically accurate representation was built recently, in 2017. But Fort King's intriguing story dates back nearly 2 centuries. After becoming an official U.S. territory in 1821, settlers began migrating to Florida. They were searching for new opportunities in this tropical, untamed frontier. It didn't take long for conflict between the American government and the Seminole to ignite. Hoping to cool the tensions, several bands of Native Americans agreed to sit down with representatives from the U.S. government. The historic meeting happened in early September 1823 at Moultrie Creek, just south of St. Augustine. Under the treaty negotiated there, the Seminole were forced to place themselves under the protection of the United States. The tribe had to give up its claim to all lands in Florida in exchange for relocation to a 4 million acre reservation in the middle of the state. The Seminoles would also receive livestock, a blacksmith, a school, and $5,000 annually over 2 decades. But the agreement had more downsides than pluses for the Seminole. Being forced inland to a swampy reservation meant they lost some very important fertile lands. They also wouldn't have access to coastal areas, cutting off weapons trading with the Spanish and English. In 1826, the first Seminole agency was established in present-day Ocala. Months later, in 1827, the U.S. Army came in and erected the original Fort King. It was named for Colonel William King, commander of the 4th Infantry and the one-time military governor of West Florida. Fort King was constructed to be a sanctuary for the Seminole, and for a couple of years, everything was peaceful. The tribe viewed the fort and soldiers favorably. But a recession hit the government, and the army abandoned the fort due to severe budget cuts. Soon the Indians were on their own, no soldiers to protect them, and reduced subsidies from the government. For 3 years, the fort sat empty, and the Seminole never touched it. They waited patiently for the soldiers to return. May 26, 1830. Congress passes the Indian Removal Act, and President Andrew Jackson signs it into law 2 days later. In the spring of 1832, a number of chiefs were called to a meeting cloaked in secrecy at Payne's Landing. The outcome wasn't good for the Seminole. Under a treaty they were coerced into accepting, the tribe would be moved west of the Mississippi River. Soldiers eventually returned to Fort King, this time with a completely different mission: to force the Seminole out of Florida. This place went from being a symbol of peace to one of oppression. The Seminoles came to resent the U.S. government, flat out refused to leave, and then tensions really started to grow. President Jackson assigned Wiley Thompson the new Indian agent at Fort King with orders to speed up the process of removal. That's when a young Seminole warrior named Osceola came onto the scene. When Osceola refused to move west, Thompson sought to change his mind by locking him up for 6 nights inside the fort and shaming him in front of his people. Thompson thought he had won the Battle of Wills when Osceola said he would agree to the relocation. The Indian warrior was released and given a brand new rifle by Thompson. But Osceola walked away very bitter about Thompson's heavy-handed persuasion and vowed revenge. Instead of leaving Florida, Osceola went back to his tribe and prepared for battle. December 28, 1835. Major Francis Thedade was leading 2 companies of U.S. troops from Fort Brooke and Tampa. Their mission, to supply and reinforce the troops at Fort King. That morning, the troops were ambushed by a group of Seminoles led by Chief Micanopy near present-day Bushnell. Almost every single soldier, including Major Thedade, was wiped out in a few hours of brutal fighting that has come to be known as the Thedade Massacre. Osceola was supposed to be with Micanopy during the attack on Thedade, but instead he stayed behind with a score to settle at Fort King. General Thompson was taking his customary afternoon stroll with another officer outside the fort when they came under attack by 60 Seminole warriors, led by Osceola. Osceola took the very rifle that was given to him by Thompson and shot him dead. Accounts say the unpopular Indian agent was also scalped by Osceola, and several others were killed in the violent raid. The 2 deadly attacks on the same day set the stage for the Second Seminole War, which would last the next 7 years. And the cunning attack by Osceola secured his place in American history books. Fort King was later burned to the ground by the Seminole, and a second fort was reconstructed in the same spot. That fort went on to be used as the first courthouse of Marion County. It too was eventually abandoned, and locals took it apart to be used for building materials. What you see on this hill today in suburban Ocala is a very convincing replica of the original structure that stood here nearly 2 centuries ago. Some historians say Fort King was the most important interior fort in all of Florida. In creating this 21st century version, designers used a single drawing of the original and correspondence from the era that described the fort. The wooden garrison measures 162 feet by 152 feet. As many as 850 logs up to 16 feet long and between 8 and 12 inches in diameter make up the walls and gates. Blockhouses that served as lookouts for the soldiers have been recreated on 2 corners. Inside are 2 staircases to the second level, which the original blockhouses would not have had. Ladders would have been utilized instead. But from the top, it's easy to see why this location was chosen for the fort. Fort King sits on about 40 beautiful acres. The visitor center is the best spot to start your exploration of the fort and its history. Interpretive displays inside show how the soldiers and Seminole dressed in the early 19th century. Artifacts discovered during excavations on property are expertly displayed in cases and help tell the story of what happened here. A new exhibit just opened up in the building you see behind me. Let's go take a look.
All of the items here in the new exhibit were obviously all recovered from the site here. These were just excavated. These are all of the blacksmith items that were found when they were looking for the footprint of the original blacksmith shop. We're going to be reconstructing that next, just as we just reconstructed the fort in 2017, so that's our next big project. And then also these, if you look at these dimes, these are pretty important because they're dated exactly the time that everything would have happened here. This one's almost in mint condition. It's an 1841, and this one's in 1838, so it's about 180 years buried underneath the ground. And then the clay pipes over here, these are one of the most recovered items here because the soldiers were smoking from clay pipes, and something interesting about those is they would actually break off the tip so they could share it with each other, because obviously dental hygiene was not a top priority, or they didn't even have dentists that they could go to. Water was not the best quality here. They all used one spring in order to bathe and drink water from, so a lot of them were getting dysentery and actually dying. So they had lots of bottles of alcohol, so it was a clean source for them, and a lot of bottles have been recovered here.
A short walk from the fort is the burial ground of the soldiers and civilians who died here between 1835 and 1842. At the conclusion of the Seminole War in 1842, the bodies of the soldiers who were buried here were ordered reinterred at the St. Augustine National Cemetery. There's a heritage teaching garden next to the visitor center, as well as nature trails to walk. One of those trails leads down to Seep Spring, the primary water source for people living in the fort. Fort King is one of those historic attractions definitely worth a visit when you're in the Ocala area. There's no admission charge, but donations are accepted for their next phase of building efforts. As of fall 2020, hours are limited. Be sure to check Facebook for the most up-to-date information. So that's it. That's a quick look at the history of Fort King here in Ocala, Florida. As always, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy gallivanting.